Welcome, everyone. Thank you for choosing to be in this space today. Take a moment to settle in, adjust your posture, and take a deep, grounding breath. Today, we are embarking on a journey that is both deeply personal and profoundly clinical. We are exploring the long, hidden road of healing from a narcissistic parental figure. Growing up under the shadow of a narcissistic parent is not simply a matter of dealing with a difficult family dynamic. It is a profound, life-altering experience. As we will discuss, parental trauma is unique, and without intervention, its echoes can be lifelong. It reshapes our nervous system, alters our perception of reality, and installs a persistent state of learned helplessness that whispers to us, even in adulthood, that we have no power. Our goal in this presentation is to pull back the curtain on this complex trauma. We will not merely describe the pain, though we will honor and validate it. Instead, we are going to use the twin lights of modern psychopathology and somatic healing to build a roadmap. This map will transition you from a state of survival where your identity was systematically dismantled into a state of personal sovereignty where you reclaim your voice, your body, and your destiny. As we move through this material, I invite you to listen to not just with your intellect, but with your body. If you notice a tightening in your chest, a shift in your breathing, or a sudden urge to distance yourself, simply acknowledge it. That is your nervous system remembering. We are here to help that nervous system learn that the danger is past and that you are safe now. So let us begin by examining the macro system, which is the family itself. To understand the raw reality of a narcissistic family, we have to look at it through the lens of systems theory. Every family develops its own culture, a set of values, traditions, and ways of communicating. But there is a fundamental difference between a healthy family culture and a dysfunctional family cult. In a healthy family culture, there is a balance between togetherness and individuality. You are loved for who you are, not just for what you do or how well you perform. Autonomy is celebrated. When a child begins to show separate interests, a separate personality, or separate opinions, a healthy parent encourages this. They see the child as a sovereign human being, embarking on their own path. In a narcissistic family, however, the system operates as a high control group, a psychological cult. The parent sits at the absolute center of the system, acting as a primitive deity. The children are not viewed as separate human beings. They are viewed as internal objects, tools or extensions of the parent's fragile ego. The family cult demands absolute loyalty and blind conformity. The most sacred rule of this system is that the parent's grandiose narrative must never be challenged. If the parent claims to be the most loving, self-sacrificing person in the world, every member of the family must reflect and validate that illusion, regardless of the emotional coldness or abuse happening behind closed doors. To question this narrative is to commit the ultimate sin, a betrayal of the family mess. Let that sink in. You did not grow up in a home. You grew up in a closed psychological ecosystem designed to keep one person's fragile ego from collapsing at the expense of your own development. To demystify how this control is maintained, we can apply Steve Hassan's famous BITE model of cult mind control. BITE stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. On this slide, we focus on the first two, behavior and information. Behavior control in a narcissistic family manifests as the systematic erasure of physical and emotional boundaries. The parent dictates not just your actions, but your career path, your friendships, your style of dress, and even your bodily autonomy. You are groomed to believe that your primary purpose is to act as a service provider for the parent's needs. Information control is even more insidious. In a healthy system, communication is open and direct. In the family cult, information is weaponized. The parent utilizes splitting and triangulation to control the flow of truth. They divide the children into rigid roles. The golden child, who can do no wrong as long as they mirror the parent's grandiosity, and the scapegoat, who is cast as the repository for all the family's toxic shadow material. The parent actively prevents the siblings from building authentic, direct relationships. They will tell the golden child lies about the scapegoat and vice versa, keeping them divided. They recruit flying monkeys, enablers, relatives, or siblings to enforce the parental narrative and police any sign of dissent. This systematic manipulation leaves the target isolated, floating in an informational vacuum where they cannot verify their own reality. Ask yourself, how many times were you told a version of family history that directly contradicted what you saw with your very own eyes? Now let us examine the latter half of the BITE model, thought and emotional control. This is where the psychological prison of the narcissistic family becomes fully fortified. Thought control in these systems is designed to suppress critical thinking and install cognitive distortions. The parent implements thought-stopping techniques. Anytime you try to voice an independent perspective or question an injustice, you are met with quick diversion, intense rage, or systematic gaslighting. The message is clear: your thoughts are dangerous, wrong, and ungrateful. You must sacrifice your authentic self to worship the parent's false self as an infallible deity. You learn to censor your own mind, preemptively shutting down any thought that might conflict with the parent's fragile equilibrium. Emotional control is the final hook. Dysfunctional families thrive on enmeshment and emotional fusion. You are not allowed to have your own feelings. If the parent is angry, the entire house must walk on eggshells. If you are sad or hurt, your pain is dismissed as dramatic or worse, interpreted as a direct attack on the parent's happiness. The parent manipulates you through a devastating cycle of intermittent reinforcement. One day they are warm, mirroring or offering praise. This is the love bombing phase. The next day, without warning, they withdraw their emotional warmth, plunging you into steely devaluation and the silent treatment. This unpredictable oscillation triggers our primitive survival and attachment instincts. Your brain becomes biochemically addicted to chasing the parent's fleeting approval, leaving you in a perpetual state of hypervigilance and anxiety. How does this environment shape the child's developing psyche? To understand this, we turn to two foundational concepts in psychoanalysis: Donald Winnicott's mirroring and Andre Green's dead mother complex. Winnicott famously wrote about the good enough mother, or parent. When an infant looks at their mother's face, they see the mother looking at them, and what they see is themselves. The parent mirrors and validates the child's raw emotional cues. This consistent, warm mirroring teaches the child, I exist, my feelings are real, and I am safe. This forms the foundation of a secure base in a healthy, integrated self. But what happens when the parent is emotionally unavailable, severely narcissistic, or depressed? Andre Green coined the term the dead mother to describe a parent who is physically present but emotionally dead, distant, or unreachable. When the child looks into the parent's face, they do not see themselves mirrored. They see a blank slate, a cold wall, or a demanding gaze that only registers the child when the child is performing. This creates what we call the architecture of absence, a howling internal void within the child's core. The child realizes that their authentic self is invisible. In a desperate attempt to bring the dead parent back to life, the child undergoes parentification. They overfunction, taking on the emotional burdens of the adult, and develop a false self designed purely to cater to the parent's needs. This void of emotional starvation is what leaves the survivor feeling deeply empty and disconnected from their own core, even decades later. As survivors of this emotional void grow, they enter a state that Dr. Peter Salerno defines as traumatic cognitive dissonance. This is a state of profound mental fog, confusion, and relentless self-doubt. It is the direct consequence of systematic gaslighting and coercive control. To understand why this happens, we must look at the biological reality of childhood. A child is entirely dependent on their caregivers for survival. If the child admits to themselves, my parent is cruel, unstable, and unsafe, their nervous system is flooded with existential terror. To survive psychologically, the child's mind makes a desperate compromise. They chose to believe, my parent is good and I am the problem. If I am just better, quieter, or more perfect, they will love me. This compromise forces the child to outsource their reality testing to the very person abusing them. When the parent gaslights the child, saying, I never said that, you are too sensitive, you are imagining things, you have mental issues, you need help, the child suppresses their own senses to preserve the attachment bond. In adulthood, this manifests as a persistent, paralyzing self-doubt. Even when the abuser is no longer present, the survivor is trapped in a mental cage, constantly second-guessing their decisions, their memories, and their worth. Healing requires us to dismantle this dissonance by courageously shifting our core lens, moving from the self-blaming question of what is wrong with me to the systems level understanding of what actually happened to me. The trauma of growing up under a narcissistic parent is not just in your mind, it is deeply embedded in your biology. Chronic, inescapable relationship stress permanently alters the autonomic nervous system. When a child lives in a constant state of threat, walking on eggshells around a volatile or cold parent, their sympathetic nervous system is chronically activated. They are trapped in a perpetual fight or flight response. But because a child cannot physically fight their parent or flee the home, their nervous system is will eventually hit its limit. To protect the organism from overwhelming pain, the body activates its oldest, most primitive defense mechanism, the dorsal vagal pathway. This is a state of dorsal vagal shutdown, better known as the freeze and fawn. It manifests as a persistent state of numbness, depersonalization, brain fog, and chronic fatigue. It is your body's way of playing dead to survive the inescapable stressor. As the famous psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk wrote, "The body keeps the score." This chronic biological shutdown eventually crystallizes into physical symptoms: sleep disorders, fibromyalgia, chronic tension, and digestive issues. Your body is holding onto the unprocessed, righteous rage and grief that you were never allowed to express. Healing, therefore, cannot be a purely intellectual exercise. We must work directly with the body to soothe the nervous system, release the chronic freeze response, and teach ourselves that we are finally safe. Let your shoulders drop and acknowledge the incredible resilience of your body, which froze to keep you alive. To fully understand why you were targeted, we must step back and look at the family through Bowen family systems theory. Murray Bowen conceptualized the dysfunctional family as a single, undifferentiated emotional unit, a highly fused ego mass where individual boundaries are viewed as a direct threat. Within this fused system, anxiety is constantly circulating. When the tension between the parental figures becomes too high to manage, they utilize a coping mechanism called triangulation. To stabilize the system, they offload their anxiety onto a third party, almost always a child. This child is cast as the identified patient or the scapegoat. The parent projects their own unowned shadow material, their shame, their sense of inadequacy, and their unexpressed aggression onto this child. By ganging up on the scapegoat, the rest of the family mass creates a fake, fragile sense of closeness and harmony. They tell themselves, "Our family is perfect. The only problem is this difficult, sensitive, or unstable child." If you were the scapegoat, you were not targeted because you were weak. You were targeted because you were the truth teller. Your empathy and your capacity to see through the family's illusion posed a mortal threat to their shared fantasy. The system needed to break you to preserve its own denial. Reclaiming your life requires you to return these projected burdens to their source and step out of the rigged role you were forced to play. The roles within a narcissistic family system are rarely fluid. They are rigidly enforced and highly dependent on sibling order, gender dynamics, and family transitions. For instance, the way mothers and fathers transmit narcissism differs. Covert overprotective mothers often create enmeshed, over-functioning children by parentifying them, while grandiose overfathers demand absolute submission to their status. When parents divorce, these dynamics often intensify. Sibling order becomes a tool for dividing and conquering. The oldest may be forced into the role of the surrogate spouse or parent, while the youngest is kept infantile and dependent. These roles are designed to prevent siblings from forming genuine alliances. If the scapegoat and the golden child were to unite, they would quickly expose the parent's pathology. Therefore, the parent systematically feeds the golden child's grandiosity while devaluing the scapegoat, creating a deep canyon of sibling resentment. Tragically, this sibling cruelty and estrangement often worsen after a parent passes away. In the wake of a parent's death, a massive power vacuum is created within the family system. The siblings, still operating under the parent's programming, will often double down on scapegoating the truth teller to maintain the family's collective denial. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for survivors. It helps you release the painful expectation that your siblings will ever validate your experience, allowing you to seek closure on your own terms. To heal the deep relational wounds of family trauma, we can also look to Bert Hellinger's work on family constellations and what he called the orders of love. Hellinger reminds us that a family system spans generations, and the trauma we carry is often transgenerational. One of the core biological and energetic realities of life is the 50% rule. We are, on a cellular level, 50% of our mother and 50% of our father. When a narcissistic parent alienates a child from the other parent or demands that the child hate or reject them, they are forcing the child to reject 50% of their own biological being. This creates a deeply fractured psyche, leading to chronic internal conflict and self-sabotage. Furthermore, Hellinger's work explores how our children carry hidden, unconscious loyalties to the system's shadow. If there is unexpressed grief, trauma, or an excluded family member in previous generations, a child, often the scapegoat, will unconsciously step forward to carry that burden, sacrificing their own happiness in a desperate attempt to balance the family soul. Healing from a narcissistic parent requires us to honor the systemic truth. We must recognize which burdens belong to our ancestors and consciously return them. Through family constellations and healing statements, we can tell our parents, I honor you as the source of my life, but I leave your trauma, your shadow, and your guilt with you. I am stepping forward into my own life. This is how we break the intergenerational transmission of trauma. As we transition into the psychology of recovery, we must address the primary mechanism that keeps survivors stuck, the state of learned helplessness. Formulated by the pioneer of positive psychology, Dr. Martin Seligman, this is a profound psychological and neurobiological state. Seligman discovered that when an organism is repeatedly exposed to uncontrollable, painful stressors, it develops a deep-seated belief that its actions are ultimately futile. Even when the situation changes and clear opportunities to escape or succeed become available, the organism remains passive and resigned. They have learned to be helpless. For a child growing up with a narcissistic caregiver, learned helplessness was not a cognitive error. It was a cold, hard reality. As a child, you truly were helpless. You had no physical power to escape, no financial independence, and no social agency. Your nervous system correctly assessed that submission and fawning were your best survival options. The pathology occurs when we carry this childhood survival mechanism into our adult lives. As an adult, your options, your resources, and your agency are vastly different. But the old default programming in your brain still tells you, why bother trying? Nothing I do will change this. Healing is about unlearning this passivity and retargeting our focus on the real, actionable choices that exist in our present reality. How does learned helplessness maintain its grip on our daily thinking? Dr. Seligman explained that this through our explanatory style, the subconscious framework we use to interpret bad events. This framework is defined by the three P's: permanence, pervasiveness, and personalization. When a survivor operating under learned helplessness experiences a setback, they interpret it through a pessimistic, rigid lens. First, permanence. They believe the pain, the enmeshment, and the stuckness will always be like this. They tell themselves, I will never heal, my life is permanently ruined. Second, pervasiveness. They allow the family trauma to color every single area of their life. If their relationship with their parent is toxic, they believe, all relationships are unsafe. My career is a failure and nothing in my world is good. Third, personalization. This is the deepest wound. They internalize the parent's projections and believe, I am fundamentally flawed, unlovable, and the sole reason for the family's misery. To transition from helplessness to learned optimism, we must actively challenge these three P's. We must recognize that the abuse was temporary, not permanent, situational, not pervasive, and a reflection of the parent's severe pathology, not a personalized truth about our worth. By rewriting these internal explanations, we reclaim our power to act. The first step of cognitive restructuring is a fundamental shift in our narrative lens. We must stop asking ourselves, what is wrong with me? Why am I so anxious, so stuck, or so broken? And instead ask, what happened to me? This shift requires us to boldly relabel the family system. We must stop using minimizing euphemisms like my family is a bit difficult or my parent is just old-fashioned. We must call it what it was, an abusive, high-control, cult-like system. The relabeling is not about cultivating resentment. It's about objective reality testing. When you label the system accurately, the toxic shame begins to lift. You realize your symptoms, the anxiety, the hypervigilance, the people-pleasing, are not signs of a personal flaw, but the natural adaptive reactions of a child trying to survive a psychological war zone. This process allows us to confront the inner critic, that harsh, perfectionistic voice in your head that whispers that you are never good enough is not your authentic voice. It is the voice of your narcissistic parent. It is the internalized, introjected voice of the narcissistic parent. Healing is an unbecoming process. It's about systematically peeling away the fawning, people-pleasing, and over-functioning patterns that kept you safe in childhood but are now suffocating your adult self. It is about choosing authenticity over systemic loyalty. To break the cycle of learned helplessness, we must actively work to shift our locus of control. Penned by psychologist Julian Rutter in 1954, this framework describes our core beliefs about what causes the outcomes of our lives. Growing up under a high-control parental figure forces a child into a deeply entrenched external locus of control. You are trained to believe that your safety, your happiness, and your worth are entirely determined by external forces, specifically the volatile mood and approval of the narcissistic parent. You become a passive bystander, hyper-vigilantly scanning the environment to stay safe. Healing is the deliberate transition to an internal locus of control. This is the deep, empowering conviction that while you cannot control what happened to you in the past, your choices, your efforts, and your decisions determine your future. You have agency. You are the protagonist of your life. But an internal locus of control is not built overnight through massive leaps. It is built through small, repeated daily acts of conscious choice and self-care. Making your bed, cooking a healthy meal, moving your body, and setting a minor boundary. These are somatic retraining exercises. They teach your nervous system, I choose, I act, and my actions have power. With each small win, your sense of agency grows. To manage our energy on this healing journey, we can apply a brilliant principle from Stephen Covey: the distinction between our circle of concern and our circle of influence. As survivors of narcissistic parental abuse, we waste enormous amounts of emotional and mental energy inside our circle of concern. We obsess over things we care about, but but we have absolutely zero control over them. How do I make my parent understand what they did? How do I get them to apologize? Why are my siblings still taking their side? When will they finally change? Trying to control these uncontrollables only breeds frustration, depression, and a deeper sense of helplessness. To reclaim our power, we must ruthlessly redirect our focus to our circle of influence, the things we have direct control over. You cannot control your parents' pathology, but you can control your boundaries. You cannot control their opinion of you, but you can control how you treat yourself. You cannot control the family's past, but you can control your present self-care, your physical distance, and your future goals. Covey's law of effectiveness states that when we focus on our circle of influence, our capacity to act and our inner peace naturally expand. By letting go of the need to fix or change the family cult, we finally free up the energy required to build our own lives. On this road to reclaiming your mind, you must avoid what Kristen Neff calls the self-esteem trap. Many self-help books will tell you to raise your self-esteem, to feel special, above average, and flawless. But striving for high self-esteem often leads to intense perfectionism and harsh self-criticism when we inevitably fall short. Instead, Neff advocates for self-compassion, which is built on these essential pillars. First, mindfulness. When you are triggered or feeling the weight of the old family shadow, you do not suppress the pain or dissociate. You simply notice it and say to yourself, "This hurts. This is the moment of suffering." Second, common humanity. You remind yourself that suffering, rejection, and dysfunctional family systems are part of the shared human experience. You are not uniquely broken, and you are not alone in the dark. Third, self-kindness. You actively speak to yourself with the warmth, gentleness, and vocal tone you would offer to a beloved friend. When your inner critic starts berating you for making a mistake, practicing a self-compassion break acts as an active somatic nervous system regulator. It brings you out of the fight or flight threat response and wraps your wounded inner parts in the safety and containment they were denied as children. We now enter the practical somatic stage of our recovery, establishing absolute boundaries. In his pioneering work on narcissistic abuse, Professor Sam Vaknin introduced the no contact rule. It is vital to understand the metaphysics of this boundary. Going no contact is not a silent treatment, a passive-aggressive maneuver, or a punitive game designed to make the parent miss you. It is a spiritual and somatic shield to protect your healing soul. It is the realization that as long as you remain in contact, the parent will continue to pull you into their shared fantasy, trigger your childhood regression, and use you as a service provider for their supply. To heal, you must burn the boats. You must completely grieve and release the healing fantasy, which is the deep childlike hope that if you just find the right words or the right therapist, your parent will finally wake up, apologize, and love you the way you deserve. No contact is the ultimate act of self-differentiation. It creates a clean, sovereign space where the enmeshment is systematically dissolved. If absolute no contact is not legally or practically possible, then you must implement limited contact or the gray rock method, treating the parent with the cold, unengaging neutrality of a gray rock, refusing to feed their drama or offer them any access to your emotional core. Because your family system has conditioned your nervous system for decades, triggers will inevitably occur. When they do, you need active, practical circuit breakers to interrupt the old reactive survival loops before they hijack your mind. First, utilize somatic grounding. When you feel a trigger rising, a tightening throat, a racing heart, or a foggy mind, do not consult your head. Focus on your body. Do a quick body scan. Practice slow, diaphragmatic breathing with an extended exhale, and place a hand on your heart. This tells your amygdala, the threat is not here. I am safe in this room. Second, implement internal mantras. Write down and repeat structured scripts to counter the parent's voice. Tell yourself, I am an adult. I have choices. I am never responsible for the happiness, the moods, or the well-being of any other adult, including my parents. Third, adopt the observational stance. If you must interact with the family, step out of the play. Stop acting as a participant in their scripted drama. Instead, put on the white coat of a neutral scientist, observing a stage psychological experiment. When the parent baits you, observe it with detached curiosity. Ah, look at that triangulation. How classic. This detachment allows you to observe, not absorb. One of the most complex phases of this recovery is navigating what we call disenfranchised grief. This is a grief that society does not recognize or validate. When a narcissistic parent passes away, or when you make the courageous decision to initiate no contact, you are met with a multifaceted, overwhelming grief. You are not just mourning the loss of a person, you are mourning the loss of the parent you deserved to have, but never had. You are grieving the fantasy of the happy family, and you are grieving the parts of your own childhood that were sacrificed to keep that parent stable. This grief can feel like a profound, confusing void. But as Ellinger and other clinicians emphasize, we must sit with this grief. We must allow ourselves to cry, to feel the righteous rage, and to fully process the pain of having been parentified and emotionally starved. By fully grieving, we can finally reconcile our ancestral lineage. We stop looking for the good enough parent in our spouses or bosses or our friends. We decide to become the loving, protective parent our inner child always needed. We step forward as the circuit breaker in our family line, ensuring that the heavy lead of inherited trauma is transformed and that the cycle of abuse ends with us. We have reached the summit of our presentation today, and we stand at the base of what we call your second mountain in life. Your first mountain was about survival, climbing through the rugged terrain of your toxic family, trying to establish an identity despite systematic devaluation, and finally finding the courage to break free. Your second mountain is about individuation and post-traumatic growth. It is the alchemical ascent into your true sovereignty. You are no longer a supporting character in your parents' fragile drama. You are the sole protagonist, the scriptwriter, and the director of your own life. It is now time to write the script of your own life story. If you were the scapegoat, remember this: the system did not target you because you were weak. It targeted you because you possessed a light, a strength, and a authenticity that their denial could not tolerate. Your body's rebellion, your panic, your anxiety, your inability to comply was not a dysfunction. It was your fundamental health screaming for the truth. Always remember that the body keeps the score. Go long on yourself. Invest in your healing. Trust your gut. And build a life based on truth, self-compassion, and deep somatic peace. The danger is over. You have survived. You are healing. And you are finally free to shine. This is the beginning of your life.